I feel like every time a synth hits the market, we tend to fuss around a lot about how it sounds and how it looks like, what the spec sheet is. And after many years of trial and error and buying lots of the wrong synths, I seem to find that there's one aspect that we don't touch on too often, but that, in my experience, has led to me loving or hating a synth. And that, my friends, is the user interface. And I know it might not sound like a huge deal, but after all, this is the way that you communicate with your synth, and it will dictate if you understand it, and in a way, if it understands you. So in this video, I want to talk to you about what things you should look out for when you're buying a new synth in terms of that very essential and very subtle aspect, the user interface. Hi, welcome to the Midlifesynthesist. Let's get started. Okay, so when you're looking for a new synth, what are the things that you usually focus on? I know that at least in my case, I tend to zone in on mainly two things. First of all is the sound. Now, this is extremely subjective, as in what may sound epic to me may sound like a huge fart to you. Now, music and music making in particular is a very personal experience, so I'm not sure how much value there is really in engaging in these debates about whether a synth sounds good or not. It's like trying to argue with a person that likes ketchup if you like mayonnaise. What I would recommend is actually downloading some sound bites and deciding for yourself, because I think that the starting point for any synth is that it has to make you feel something. In short, if you don't vibe with the way a synth sounds, it really doesn't matter how good everybody else might think it is. It's just not you. Move on, game over. The second thing I tend to focus on when I'm looking at a new synth is, pretty obviously, the spec sheet. And that's because it's kind of the most objective way of looking at a new synth and figuring out if it's what you're looking for or not. Now, beware of the spec sheet. Don't take it that seriously. And what I mean by that is that experience has taught me, and maybe you've seen this as well, that most synths are way more than just the sum of their parts, or in some cases, much less. The best example I can think of is the Korg Monologue. Without being balls to the wall crazy full packed of features, you can get away with some pretty cool sound design, and that thing sounds amazing, which shouldn't coincide not by the price point and not by the spec sheet. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these things. Finally, for those responsible people out there, there's the gut-wrenching, butt-clenching issue of price. Man, are these bastards expensive. Now, of course, the price will be the deciding factor for most of us who do not have unlimited resources. And whether a synth is appropriately priced or not will depend largely of the value that you place on it, the brand, and what it represents to you. So once again, it's a very personal choice. Goes without saying, if a synth is way beyond your budget, get it anyway. So with that out of the way, the one factor that I rarely see mentioned when we're talking about synths, and what in my experience can make or break a synth, is the user interface. And by that, I mean how you communicate with the machine that you're using, how fast it is, how intuitive, how fun it is. And that for me has become one of the greatest aspects to look out for. You see, thanks to a severe case of chronic gas, I have gone through a lot of synths in the last few years. So much so that I had to start a little YouTube channel so I could tell my wife that that's the reason why I keep buying them. Anyway, the thing that stuck out to me the most is that after the honeymoon period was over, the synths that I kept on using the most were not necessarily the most feature-packed ones, or even the best sounding ones. And I'd like to give you a few examples to show you what I mean. The Modal Sculpt is probably the best synth that I can think of for the point I'm trying to make here. If you don't know about it, it's this tiny little virtual analog synth with a shitload of oscillators, a ton of features, and it sounds amazing. Even better, this thing was tiny, battery powered, had lots of knobs on the front panel, and the price was very attractive. So I went ahead and I bought one. And guess what? The sound of this thing is amazing. Okay, so the sound was awesome. In the feature department, it checked off all the boxes. And the price was just perfect. So why wasn't this the perfect synth? Why did I end up selling it? And the answer is a lackluster interface. You see, this was not a fun synth to program or interact with. First off, you get the very plastic and flimsy feeling knobs. Most, if not all the knobs and keys had secondary functions. The way the panel was laid out, sort of askew and diagonal, while at first being cool, will later prove to be very hard to read, Not only that, but this thing suffered from some serious glitches and bugs at the time, making it very frustrating to use, and many times you had to restart the synth just to get it going again. A much more usable way of programming the synth was using the companion computer app. The problem with that was, it basically turned this into a VST, so even though the sound was absolutely gorgeous, the interface and the experience of using the synth was actually enough to kill it off and make it a thoroughly unenjoyable experience. Now, you might think that this might be because this was a budget synth, but actually this has happened to me with higher end synths as well. I remember a few years back when the Novation Peak and Dave Smith Instruments Prophet 8 Rev 2 came out. I remember the heated arguments in the forums about people debating which one they should buy. Pretty much like I said before, the argument revolved mainly around which one sounded richer, how good the filters were, and how deep the mod matrix was. Well, I got both. And the thing is, in the long run, what really defined which one I stuck with was the user interface, once again. Now, I'm not trying to dump on the Rev 2. I think it's a pretty cool synth, and it certainly has some amazing sound shaping capabilities. It just wasn't for me, in the sense that I didn't click with that interface. Something about it felt off or disconnected. Like when I was turning the knobs, I didn't really feel the response in the sound that I was shaping. Not only that, but the keyboard felt somewhat disconnected from the synth engine. So when I was playing it, it kind of felt like I had this lag, like you might expect when you're using a MIDI keyboard with a VST. So in the end, it wasn't so much of a great experience, and I couldn't really get inspired by it, which to me just ruined it for me. Now, the Peak was an absolutely different experience. Programming a sound on it couldn't feel more intuitive, and the panel is just one of the most logical layouts I've had the pleasure of using. The knobs felt sturdy and actually connected to something on the inside of the machine. It's no mystery then which one I ended up keeping and which one I ended up letting go. Which is a shame, because I really wanted a Dave Smith instrument in my setup. So let's say that you found a synth that you like the sound, are happy with the feature set, and you think you can afford. My advice to you is, before you pull the trigger, take a minute and look for these few things on the user interface. Beware of hidden secondary functions, especially if they're not written anywhere in the front panel. And the reason for that is that if you have to memorize these secondary functions and button combos, then it's probable that if you have more than one synth, and let's face it, if you're watching this channel, you probably do, you're probably going to forget about those button combos, and in the long run, you might even forget that your synth has those functions in the first place. So you're not going to be using your synth to its full potential. Same thing goes for those synths that require excessive menu diving in order to get to those fun parameters. Looking at you, Novation Ultranova. Screen or no screen? That is the question. Personally, I highly appreciate the information that you can get from just a few lines of text on a little LED screen. I'm not talking about something huge or even a touchscreen like on the MPCs. I'm talking about something very functional and very practical, kind of like what you get on the Moog Sub 37 or on the Microfreak. Just enough to know the values of your parameters and, to store a few presets, stuff like that. Finally, and this is important and difficult in the age of COVID, try the synth out first. And what I mean by that is that there is nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, that can replace the actual feeling of your hands on that synth. What I would humbly recommend is that before you go and try out the synth in the flesh, is try to get a sense of how it works and what it does. And what I mean by that is maybe watch a few tutorials on YouTube, or even read the manual so you know what you're doing when you get your hands on it. Then, when you're there, ask yourself, does this thing make sense to me? Do the knobs feel right? Do the keys feel right? Is it speaking to me? Is it something that's logical? Or is this absolute gibberish? Go to the store more than once if you have to. Of course, it is hard to predict what your relationship will be with the synth, or any instrument for that matter. You don't really know until you've had it for a while. But still, I am a firm believer that any instrument, be it a synth, a guitar, what have you, it's not like buying a cell phone or a computer. You can't just buy it off the spec sheet. It has to speak to you, at least on some level. The way I see it, no matter how good a synth sounds or how many LFOs it has or whatever, if you're not having fun interacting with it, then you're not going to reach out and grab it. On the flip side, if you do have fun with it, it'll inspire you, and that'll lead to making more music, and the world is going to be a better place for it. I hope you enjoyed this topic, and I'd love to know what you think about it. What synths you enjoyed the most, and which ones frustrated the hell out of you. Anyway, I hope you found this video useful, or at least entertaining. I'll see you in the next one.